The book of Exodus. That's not too hard to find. Go to Genesis and go right one book. We're going to be in chapter 20 for a couple of verses, and then in chapter 32. True or false? As I wrote down the title of the message, I was reminded of this joke won't fit in anywhere in the message. It's just a true-false joke. I'm reminded of a kid who was sitting in class one day, and he was taking a test. He was taking a true-false test, as a matter of fact. And he pulls out a coin and starts flipping the coin. He had flipped a coin, it'd land in his hand, he'd write down an answer. He'd flip it again, land in his hand, he'd write down an answer. His buddy behind him taps him on the shoulder. "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm taking this true-false test." "How are you doing that?" He said, "I'm flipping a coin. If it comes down on heads, I write true. If it comes down on tails, I write false." So he's done with the test, and the guy's still flipping the coin up in the air, and his buddy taps him on the shoulder again. He said, "I thought you were done." He said, "I am." He said, "What are you doing now?" He said, "I'm checking my answers." It'll take a minute for that one to sink in. I don't know how he fared on that, but at least on true-false test, you got a 50% chance to get it right. But I guess you got a 50% chance to get it wrong too. Last week we talked about wanting a God that we can understand, wanting a God that we can figure out, wanting a God that will give us an answer every time we have a question. And I told you last week, that kind of God is a God that we conjure up in our mind. That's not the God of the Bible. None of us, I think, on any given day or week can figure out everything that God's up to, even in our own personal life. We don't know. There's questions we have that God doesn't answer. There's places He sends us that we don't know why we're there. There's circumstances that come up in our life. But I think if we're honest, there's times in our life, especially during those really difficult times, we wish we had a God we could understand and figure out, and a God that would give us the answer. But then I think that's short term, because I think long term, as that episode of our life plays out, I think we're glad we don't have a God we can figure out. Because I'm telling you, if the God I serve, if I could figure Him out, He stands about this high. Because I can't hardly figure out anything. But I'm glad that even when God doesn't give us the answers, He gives us Himself. He gives us His presence in life. And so we talked a little bit about that last week, about wanting a God that we could understand. And this morning I want to kind of pick up with that and give us another thought that I think we're all guilty of sometimes. And I wrote it down here. I wrote it down here like this. There's sometimes, and many people want a God that's like this. They want a salad bar God or a Build-A-Bear God. You're thinking, he's nuts. And yes, I am. But what I mean by that is this. When you walk up to a salad bar, the kids may not relate to that. They'll relate more to Build-A-Bear. But when you walk up to a salad bar and you begin to walk down that salad bar, what do you get to do at a salad bar? You get to choose, don't you? If there's something there you want, you put it on your plate. If not, you walk by it. Same thing with the kids. I've been in, never built one, but I've been in the Build-A-Bear things. I mean, they're unreal. You can go and pick animals and clothing and all kinds of stuff. But the point is, you get to pick and choose. And I think sometimes in our life, we want a God that we can pick and choose from. Let me ask you this. What are some of the attributes of God that we like in our life? We like His grace, peace, forgiveness, mercy, love. We love those, and the list go on and on. What are some of the things, and this one may be a little bit more difficult, but what are some of the things that we wish we could leave out if we could pick and choose? Wrath? Chastisement? Suffering? Oh my goodness, yes. The kids ought to answer this one. Lie? God won't lie to us, but yeah, you're right. What else? Discipline. That's one you kids should have answered. Discipline. Y'all like it when mom and daddy disciplines you? You like it when they take the video games or the Xbox? No, we don't, do we? And we don't like it when God disciplines us. But those are some of the things about God that we wish we could leave out. If you have your Bibles open to Exodus chapter 20, I want you to look at the first two commandments here. Because we're going to look at these and look at how Israel broke this second commandment. But the first commandment says this: Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The second commandment says, Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. And it uses a word here in verse 4, the second commandment, Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. What are some images or idols that people worship? Food. That didn't take long. Toys. Buddha. Yeah. Money. The sun. I mean, you think about all these things that people worship. And it says here, you shall not make of thee any graven image. I think to me, what this verse says to me, it's making God into something He's not. And I don't mean just in statue form. I mean in our minds. It's making God out to be, and I'll share some of these things with you in just a minute. It's making God out to be something in our mind that He's not. The first commandment, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. That verse, that commandment, focuses on worshiping the wrong God. That's putting something else ahead of God. The second commandment, when He talks about not making any graven images, is worshiping the right God in the wrong way. And I think we have a tendency to do both of those things. I think we have a tendency, probably more often than we like to admit, that's two commandments we break rather easily in our life. I mean, again, why is the world in the condition it's in? Or let me narrow it down. Why is the church in the condition it's in? Because we put other things ahead of God. Other things more important than God. And, I mean, you look at the activities and things that go on in life today on Sunday that wasn't there 10 years back, 5 years back. And I was talking to, it may have been Brother Charles, the guy I worked with on the farm. He and I were talking the other day, and I told Charles, I don't know how far into the future. I hope I'm not around when it happens. But you know what I see in the future in our country and in our world? A 7-day-a-week lifestyle. Church is still going to go on. All your stores are going to be open. I mean, a lot of them's open now. Everything's going to be open. Everything's going to be available. Church is going to be less of an option down the road than it is today. And that's where I see our country headed. And why? You can go back to these two commandments right here. You shall have no other gods before me. We're either worshiping something in place of God, or we're attempting to worship the right God in the wrong way. And I think and those two commandments kind of tie hand in hand. You know, we want a God that we can configure in our mind, a God that we can put in a box, A God that we get to choose all the things about Him we like, but Lord, leave out the discipline, leave out the suffering, leave out the wrath, leave out all those things. Just give us the one side of You. And again, the Bible doesn't portray God as that kind of God. We can't figure Him out, and we don't get to pick and choose. So, how did Israel break the second commandment? How did they make a graven image that they treated as God? Go over to Exodus chapter 32. And we're going to look at this for a minute, and then I want to close this morning by sharing 3 truths about false gods, whatever they may be in your life and in my life. But in Exodus chapter 32, beginning in verse 1, notice what the story says. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, and you remember why Moses was up in the mountain? What was Moses up there doing? He was talking to God, but what was he getting from God? The 10 Commandments. Moses climbs up this mountain. He's up there communing with God when this takes place. The people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount. The people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, not this Aaron, by the way, and said unto him, Up, make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. Moses has gone up into the mountain to get the 10 Commandments from God. The people basically get tired of waiting. And you know, I pondered that thought. Aren't we the same way with God? You know, they're waiting on Moses. Moses hasn't come back in a time that they think he ought to be back. And so the people basically freak out. We do the same thing with God. When God doesn't respond and act when we think He should within a given time, we do the same thing that the nation of Israel does. We move away from God. You may not go build a little calf or an image or a statue, but other things, we begin to try and put our trust and help and hope in other things. And listen, I think that's one of the reasons God delays in all of our lives, in our circumstances. It's not that He can't fix it. It's not that He can't make it all right at that moment. He's doing it to show us where we are in our faith. And am I willing to trust God? Am I willing to wait? Am I willing to be still and know that He's God? Am I willing, as the Bible says again, to wait patiently on the Lord? Listen, I wait, but it's not with patience. I detest waiting, whether it be with my wife, my kids, or with God. I don't like to wait. I want God to fix tomorrow's problem today. I guess so that I can worry about Tuesday's problem on Monday. We're wired to do that. But Moses goes up into this mountain. They think Moses and God both have abandoned them. And so they begin to do what we're about to read. But listen, before Exodus 32 verse 1 happens, 3 things God has already done for Israel. And they mention one of them in verse 1. Where had Moses delivered them from? Egypt. He just brought them out of there. Do you remember how they got around during the daytime and by the nighttime? What did God put over them in the daytime? A cloud. What did He give them at night? Stars, fire. He gave them light to make it and go. They could see. What did He part for them when Pharaoh came after them after they left Egypt? The Red Sea. And again, you're not marching 15 people across the Red Sea. You're marching in the neighborhood of 2 million people. That's a lot of folks. And God held them back, held the water back, held Pharaoh back. And God had done all these things. And you would think, comparatively speaking, what God has done, and yet Moses and God are in the mountain too long. Moses, you should have been here 5 minutes ago. And he wasn't. And in that delay, the people began to take matters into their own hands. And man, isn't that just like us? God, you hadn't moved when I think you ought to move, so let me take matters into my own hand. Look at what verses 2 through 4 say. And Aaron said unto them, break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives and of your sons and of your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people brake off the golden earrings which were in the ears, and brought them unto Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it into a molten calf. And they said, these be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Verses 5 through 7. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early on the morning and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. Not in a good way, let me add. Skip down to verses 19 and 20 of Exodus 32. All this is going on while Moses is up in the mountain getting the 10 Commandments from God. It says in verses 19 and 20, and it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, Moses is coming back down out of the mountain. He's seeing all this that's going on at the foot of the mountain. He saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot. And he cast the tables out of his hands and brake them beneath the mount. And he took the calf which they had made and burnt it in the fire and ground it to powder and strawed it upon the water and made the children of Israel drink of it. And then verses 22 through 24. And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord wax hot. Thou knowest the people, that they are set on mischief. For they said unto me, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. And I said unto them, whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me. Then I cast it into the fire, and there came out this calf. I mean, this guy's again like Houdini or Copperfield. But notice the foolishness of what Israel did. And again, it comes on the heels of everything that God has done for them. I think that's why one of the tragedies in our Christian life is to do what the first 2 commandments suggest we not do. Put something ahead of God, or try to create God into this image. Worshiping the wrong God, or trying to worship the right God in the wrong way. And every time we stray from God, every time we get off base spiritually, I think it can always be run back to a false god in our life. Because we're not trusting in the one true God. That's what Israel does here. And they begin to conjure up this calf that Aaron makes, which shows nothing more than a lack of trust. Let me share with you 3 truths about false gods. And we all deal with them in our life. Hopefully we keep those things away and out of the place of the true God. And we don't try to conjure up the real one God, the one true God, in our mind in a way that's not becoming of who He is. But number 1 is this. False gods correspond to our fears. In other words, every time we create a false god in our life, it creates fear. And it's born out of a lack of trust. Listen, Moses is up in the mountain with God. The people feared. They didn't know what happened to Moses. They didn't know if just Moses had abandoned them or if Moses and God had teamed up together and said, you know what, they're not worth it. And it was all because Moses delayed. And the people began to fear. And fear leads to more lack of trust. If you're fearing, you're not trusting. If you're trusting, you're not fearing. And Israel was fearing. Moses had abandoned them. God had abandoned them. Remember when Israel kept asking God for a visible king? I mean, all these other nations had them. I mean, they were fighting real people. They wanted a real God they could see to help fight their enemies. Remember who God sent? King Saul. It's like the old saying goes, be careful what you ask for. Why? Because you just might get it. And so God gave them Saul. And God was sufficient enough. But they believed something they could see. They wanted a visible God. Here are some examples, a couple examples that I wrote down of the false gods that we conjure up in our minds, lies that we tell ourselves. The only way I'll be happy is to be prosperous. People tell themselves that. Here's another one. My sins are not as bad as other people's sins. That's another way we rationalize and justify ourselves. Here are some ways that we reshape God. See if you've ever used these in your life before or know of anybody who has. If I obey God, nothing bad will ever happen. You know, there are some people who have the idea that now that I'm a Christian, my life ought to be the red carpet. If you've been a Christian for any length of time, you know that that's not anywhere near close. It's trials, it's struggles, it's all these things that God uses to grow our faith that normally we wouldn't sign up for. Here's another one. If I tithe, I'll always have money. No, I will tell you this, though, and I can testify to this one, you'll have your needs met. I do know that. God is faithful to do that. God is so faithful. And it's not, we're doing a thing on giving in Sunday school, and I tell the men, it's not just money, it's time and talents. You know, I keep telling myself, I don't have time to do that. And then when I go and do what God's asked me to do, I wind up with more time than I know what to do with. The same thing with using the talents God's gifted you with. Here's one. If I pray for my family, especially for my kids, they'll always do right. That's not the case either, is it? Now, we're to pray for them. Listen, every morning when I take the kids to school, every morning we make the loop through West Jones Elementary, and when I drop Cameron off at high school, I pray not just for my kids, but for the kids, for the teachers, for the schools. Does that mean that my kids are never going to get sick, or something's not going to ever happen to them, or something's never going to happen at the school? No. But we're to pray. And I think we conjure up in our minds that we think because I do that everything's going to be okay. And I can promise you, listen to me, it will be okay. By God's standards, it will be okay. But that doesn't mean that something's not ever going to happen. God's in control of all of that. And I think we lose trust in God if we're not careful when something in the unforeseen happens that we don't have mapped out in our life. And then when that happens, we either put something there in place of God, or we begin to look at God in a way He's not intended to be looked at. We draw up a God that doesn't fit these characteristics. Here's the second thing. False gods destroy us spiritually. Look at Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 5. Thus saith the Lord, what iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they are gone far from me, and have walked after vanity, and are become vain. Look at this quote. False gods distort the real God, which in turn distorts us. You know, one of the main thing that was symbolized in that calf that Aaron and the children of Israel built, you know what it symbolized? Strength. And you know what? As you look at that story, they were trying to build an image that would represent the strength of God. They were trying to minimize God is what they were doing. They were trying to focus on one attribute of God. They were reducing God to this golden calf that they made. Listen, guys, we can't reduce God. We can reduce and destroy our spiritual life when we begin to think we can reduce God. We can figure Him out. We can pick and choose with God things that we like about Him, things that we don't like about Him. And that destroys our spiritual life. All it does is create more false gods, more things in our life that are more important than God. And the way we grow spiritually is trusting God when it makes no sense to trust Him at all, humanly speaking. But it's saying, Lord, I don't understand it. But if I look back on my life at all the things that You have done for me, I'd be a fool not to trust You. So even though I can't see, even though I don't understand it, even though I don't like it, I'm going to trust You. And when we do that, we begin to grow spiritually. And then those false gods seem to fall further away. As we get a clear picture of the one true God, the false gods seem so irrelevant, and they are. Whatever our false gods are, and we all have them. We all have false gods. We all have things in our life that at times we put in place of God, or we conjure up to be God and He's not. We all do it. We all have to deal with that. But the key to overcoming that is to grow spiritually, to trust God when it would make sense to trust something else. So false God destroys us spiritually. And here's the last one. False gods always disappoint. You know that image that Israel made, all because they didn't trust God, they didn't trust that Moses was coming back, they didn't know what was going on, and they needed a visible sign of God, or so they thought. You know, they created that image. What could that image ever do for them? Nothing. But do you know that there was one thing that image did for Israel? One thing. And the same things that our false gods do for us. You know what it is? Push us further away from the true God. That's what it did. That's what it did for them. And there was nothing in it, nothing in that image that could bring satisfaction to them. And God says, I'll supply your every need. I'll walk with you. I'll talk with you. I'll be with you through all of life's difficulties. Every false god we have in our life, what have they ever done for us? But cause fear, cause disappointments, destroy us spiritually. Anything that we place ahead of the real true God, anything that's false in our life will lead to fear and destruction. But the true God leads to peace and joy and contentment. Listen to what Tim Keller once said. I'm going to skip that last verse, William. Tim Keller says this: only the faith that believes God regarding things it doesn't want to hear can believe God about the things it desperately does want to hear. Only the faith that believes God regarding things it doesn't want to hear can believe God about the things it desperately does want to hear. When things in our world get turned upside down, when life gets so far off track we can't find our way back to the main road, God says, trust me. Trust me and continue to walk with me and let me build and grow your faith. But every time we erect a false god in our life, every time we put something ahead of God, it creates fear. We slide backwards spiritually and we're disappointed. Last quote that I want to put up, and I think this one was in the message, may have been last week. Do you want a God small enough to be understood or a God big enough to be worshiped? Do you want a God small enough to be understood or a God big enough to be worshiped. We looked this morning at chapter 32 at how the nation Israel tried to conjure up God in a way that He wasn't. They looked at the real God in a wrong way. I wonder what in our lives is there this morning that shouldn't be. What in my life is more important than God? You know, that may not mean a lot now, but guys, and look, I don't know when Jesus is coming back, but one day each one of us is going to stand before Him. And you know what? It's going to matter then. It's going to matter when we're standing before Him face to face on Judgment Day. It's going to matter then. And all these things that get in my way of God, and I'm speaking personally, all these things that I put ahead of God, all these times that I look more at my circumstances than I look at the God who allowed that circumstance to be there, all those times that I let those things give me a faulty image of God, I'm going to stand before Him one day and I'm going to give an answer why I did that. Lord, why was this more important on this day than serving You? Why was my circumstances in my mind bigger than the God I serve? Why? And guys, the only way that we can remove the false gods in our life, the only way we can stop being deceived and blinded is to, number one, have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Know that He is my salvation. And then it's not just stopping there. You can be saved and live the rest of your life in doubt and fear and all other kinds of things. But it's growing every single day in my walk with Him. And I'm telling you, that's not easy. I'm telling you as a pastor, that's not easy. I know it's not easy for any of you guys that are out there in it 5 and 6 days a week. It's not easy, but it's necessary. It's necessary to move everything else out of the way and make the most important one, God, the most important one. And you know what? Probably every one of us know what needs to change in our life for that to happen. And I'm encouraging you to do that. Not for me, not for this church. Listen, I and this church will benefit from it just like you'll benefit from it when I keep God where He needs to be in my life. But do it for the glory of God. Whatever area of your life God's touched this morning, whatever it is, respond to Him. He's touched it for a reason this morning. And you know what that reason is? It's one of those things about Him that we like. He loves you. He's gracious. He's merciful. He loves you. And He wants you to deal with whatever He's put His finger on this morning to make you the man and woman and boy and girl that God's created us to be. Let's pray. Father, thank You this morning for all those attributes of You that we love. But God, thank You too for those times that You do discipline, that You chastise, that You just take us to the woodshed because we're not walking in obedience to You. And Father, it's during those times, even though we don't like them, that You are displaying love. So Father, thank You for the disciplines. Thank You for the hard times of life so that You can prove Your love to us. And Lord, I pray this morning for anyone who's in a storm. I pray, God, that they would know Your peace and Your joy and Your love in the midst of it. And God, I pray that through life's sufferings, that we wouldn't erect false gods in our life. That we wouldn't say that God's not fair, that this shouldn't be happening. But Lord, help us to turn to You and say, Lord, I trust You. That You work all things for good in my life. And I trust You in this season of my life.